This is Singapore's metro system. It serves 2.1 million passengers per day and stretches 200 kilometers. And this is LA's metro system. It serves 178,000 passengers per day and is 157 kilometers in length, which doesn't make sense. I mean, how can two places with population sizes that are so similar have so different ridership on their metro systems? Well, it has to do with Singapore's amazing design and incredible public transport. You see, while these two systems are roughly the same length, train frequency is very different. Singapore's metro trains come every 2 to 3 minutes during rush hour and every 5 to 7 minutes at off-peak times. In LA, it's a different story. Here they come every 5 to 10 minutes depending on the time. Which isn't great, but that's just because people aren't using them. So why are so many people using Singapore's metro system and not LA's? Well, this is where we get into the ingenious design of Singapore's metro. To show you what I mean, here's the map of Singapore's metro system I just showed you, but overlaid on a map of the population density of the city. And as you can see, the metro system serves all the key areas, but most importantly has a ring that goes through nearly every high population area, serving people who want to go from one side of the city to another rather than having to go through the city center, which isn't the case with LA's metro system. As you can see from this map, where I've done the same thing, overlaying the metro system on top of a population density map. Clearly, this system is good at moving people to and from the city center, but not from one edge of the city to another, which could very well be the explanation for the much lower ridership of the LA metro. And just to highlight how much further ahead Singapore is than LA, their official master plan states that they will install imaging sensors and laser scanners below trains to monitor track conditions in real time, to know exactly when repairs are necessary, avoiding unnecessarily long delays and downtimes. But I think it's time we discuss the fascinating car situation in Singapore. See, here a Toyota Corolla costs $99,500, which admittedly is very expensive, but that is by design. And to understand why a Toyota Corolla is so expensive and how it contributes to the insanely good design of Singapore, you just have to look at this map. See, Singapore is an island located here between Malaysia and Indonesia. The country is home to over 5 million people on just 719 square kilometers of land. To put that into perspective, that's half the size of Los Angeles, but with 1.7 million more people. This just goes to show that Singapore has designed its infrastructure to make the most of its small footprint, making it one of the best designed cities in the world. But of course, with such limited land available, the city has taken a unique approach to achieve such success, as Singapore uses a quota to keep the number of passenger cars on the roads stable at around 600,000 vehicles. To enforce this quota, drivers must buy a 10-year certificate of entitlement, also known as a COE, for the right to use the country's roads. At auction, the COE currently runs around $58,000 for a small car or nearly $80,000 for a larger one. That means drivers pay a lot more for the car up front, but there are still more, as the total cost of owning a Toyota Corolla over a 10-year period is nearly $150,000, which is of course achieved by having the car itself cost about $99,500, as well as insurance, repairs, parking, road tolls, and petrol. Comparing this to a Corolla in the United States that starts at around $20,000, the price seems exorbitant. So it's quite a bit more expensive in Singapore to own a car, and this is without taking congestion charging into account. See, Singapore began charging vehicles to enter the city centre in the 1970s, well before European cities like London or Rome did it. The result is that traffic flows very well, even at rush hour. The average rush hour speed on Singapore's expressways is still 60 km an hour, just a bit lower than the 90 km an hour speed limit. And interestingly, New York City will soon follow their lead and become the first US city to charge vehicles to enter, paying $23 to access parts of Manhattan. Which goes to show that this system must work. And while car enthusiasts might call these anti-car policies, Singapore's government claims it doesn't want to ban cars but just move towards a car-light society. Another way they are incentivizing the use of different modes of transport is their cycling and walking infrastructure. As Singapore is planning a future with lots of ways to get around, the city already has 120 kilometers of cycling paths and it plans to add another 700 kilometers by 2030. Assuming the same quality of bike infrastructure is achieved, that's actually longer than Amsterdam or Copenhagen, even if their cities have much smaller populations. Singapore's plan even includes 21.5 kilometers of continuous bike and bus lanes running north to south by 2026. But their walking infrastructure is a marvel in and of itself, and it might be even more impressive as the city has developed a 200-kilometer long network of covered walkways. In a city with a tropical climate, monsoon rains, and intense sunshine, this is a genius way to make walking an attractive option for its residents. The walkways are especially concentrated around public transport to improve the walk between metro, LRT, and bus stops. It really goes to show how much Singapore cares about its population, further emphasized by their unique approach to housing. And this is where things really start to get interesting. What's incredible is how much of what I'm about to tell you has happened in such a short time frame, since Singapore became an independent nation in 1965. Alright, so when the Housing and Development Board was created in 1960, many residents of the quickly growing city-state lived in overcrowded and unclean housing. So the HDB got to work and quickly started building high-rise flats for its residents with modern amenities like electricity and running water. By 1976, barely a decade after independence, more than half of Singaporeans were living in public housing. During the same era, Europe and the US infamously embarked on public housing projects as well, but the end result couldn't be more different. Take for example the Pruitt-Igoe housing project, which was built in St. Louis in 1954. It aimed to provide proper accommodation to people living in slums, but in less than 10 years it became one itself, and the massive 30-building complex was demolished after less than 20 years. So how come the result was so different in Singapore? Well, there are a few different reasons. Unlike Pruitt-Igoe, Singapore's public housing estates include a mix of income groups and ethnicities, which is enforced by quotas. But even just the design of Singapore's public housing is radically different. Major projects are built around, quote, new towns, or hubs with schools, restaurants, shops, and transit within walking distance. Many housing estates have hawker centers which feature Singapore's world-famous street food. Next, Singapore's government has a renovation program to keep older housing complexes attractive places to live. But the most important factor, I think, is home ownership. The Housing and Development Board sells new apartments to citizens for below market rate. But there is a catch. You must keep the flat for more than 5 years, and technically speaking, you don't own it. You have a 99-year lease. Which I know sounds annoying, but are you really going to live beyond 130 anyway? The result of the HDB's approach is that more than 80% of Singaporeans live in public housing today, and 95% of that is owner-occupied. Singapore really has a knack for ambitious construction projects, one of those being the country's Changi Airport, that is regularly rated the best in the world with its eye-catching jewel fountain and gardens. And the airport is even set to double in size by around 2035 with the addition of Terminal 5, which is designed for an additional 50 million passengers per year. It's truly astonishing. But what's most amazing is that the airport was built on land that used to be underwater. Which leads us to the most fascinating aspect of Singapore, if you ask me. See, since colonial times, Singapore has added over 14,000 hectares of land through land reclamation, adding nearly 25% more land than before the British arrival in 1819. Just look at this map to see the land added so far, and then what may be added in the future. Singapore actually has a larger percentage of the land claimed than the Netherlands, which is crazy to think about. But still, no country is perfect, and land reclamation has come at a cost for the environment. An example are the mangrove tree forests that dropped from 75 square kilometers in size in 1819 to just 6.6 square kilometers today. And this is quite sad because these mangrove trees aren't just any type of trees, as they have almost magical properties like surviving in salt water, soaking up huge amounts of carbon, and protecting the coast from storm-caused flooding flooding and erosion. And with most of Singapore less than 15 meters above sea level, it's no surprise the government has tried to replant some mangrove forests. Singapore's rapid continued development has come with other environmental costs though, with only 2 square kilometers left of what was once 400 square kilometers of tropical forests. What's alarming is that some of these remaining forests could be threatened by future rail projects. Since independence in 1965 though, the city has made an effort to reverse environmental degradation. From the beginning, one major goal they wanted to achieve was to clean up the city's polluted rivers, to reduce its reliance on imported water, in case tensions flared up with Malaysia. So they've built reservoirs to catch rainwater, and they now collect the water from 2/3 of the city-state's entire surface. Today, Singapore gets its water from 4 different sources: imported water from Malaysia, rainwater catchment, desalination, and what it calls, quote, new water. And if you're wondering what new water is, it's just a fancy term for treated wastewater. The reservoirs include Marina Bay, which alone can provide for 10% of the city's water needs. But the city's focus on the environment goes beyond just water. In 1967, Singapore's first Prime Minister announced his vision for a garden city. At first, this was mostly planting trees, but the idea has expanded over time. Today, the city boasts 7,800 hectares of green space, including 4 nature reserves. And since 2009, developers have been required to replace the land they take up with green spaces. This requirement has led to green buildings across the city, like the 340-meter-long Sky Park on top of Marina Bay Sands. The city's Skyrise Greenery project aims to add 200 hectares of green walls and roofs to buildings in the city by 2030. The government is providing incentives too, offering developers up to half of the installation cost for green roofs and walls. By 2030, the city's green plan aims for all residents to live 10 minutes or less from a park, which is great news. I mean, I know firsthand how much joy I get from living close to a park here in Copenhagen. But anyway, most amazingly of all this is how Singapore has managed to accomplish it all in less than 60 years. And the reason for this might be its peculiar government. See, while Singapore is a democracy, the People's Action Party has maintained a monopoly on ruling the island city-state, giving them the time to plan long-term projects without worrying much about opposition. This situation has allowed for this massive construction of infrastructure and housing. Of course, progress has come at a cost. Beyond the environmental damage, much of Singapore's architectural heritage has been lost to development. See, the city used to be dotted by these kampongs, which are small villages with a unique architecture and rural lifestyle. Today, only 2 kampongs survive. Still, since the 1980s, huge effort has been put into preserving the city's iconic Chinese stophouses, with over 7,000 buildings now legally protected. But the government is now prioritizing incorporating historical structures into new developments, like the Great Madras Hotel, which was built as one of the city's first public housing projects in the 1940s. So yeah, Singapore isn't perfect, but its solutions for transport, housing, and green spaces are a huge inspiration, and it's no doubt an insanely well-designed place. But that's it for this video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.